With a fairly new book release and a plethora of revival rumors, the internet's made a triumphant return to the mysterious and hilarious world of Gravity Falls, and that, of course, includes us.
Just going to ignore that.
This is Gravity Falls characters good to evil. Let's get into the weirdness right away. As usual, we're starting with the more semi-trustworthy characters here in the good category. We have a gold medal of good here, and it's time for someone to get it. Get it! That someone is none other than Tyler Cute Biker. Even if you don't remember this guy's name, you'll no doubt remember him being one of the most iconic running gags in the show. There certainly isn't anything bad to say about Tyler. He's a mild-mannered enthusiasm enthusiast who's always there to hype people up, particularly big buff redheads. I mean, hey, we're not judging. As for why Tyler's our top pick, that involves his role in The Stanturian Candidate and beyond. Here, Tyler's the most honest of the Gravity Falls citizens running for mayor, and when Weird Mageddon comes about, Tyler puts himself in between the townspeople and Bill Cipher to protect them. He might be scrawny and delicate, but Tyler has a heart of gold and a will of steel, so if you ask us, he deserves the gold medal of good. Taking a close runner-up spot is Seuss.
Your face is good. I'm a Seuss.
Come on, who doesn't love Seuss, dudes? This lovable gopher, or human, it's never really made clear, is the most faithful ally of the beloved mystery twins. He's always down to join them on adventures, being just as much of a kid at heart as Dipper and Mabel are kids at everything else. While he's a bit of a man-child, Seuss is also a good big brother figure. He's willing to risk his life to protect Dipper and Mabel, from saving them from Gobblewonker to describing looking out for them as his personal mission in the episode Not What He Seems. The absolute worst we could say about Seuss is that he's childish, but frankly, the worst this ever leads to is some poor social skills.
So, you're probably a girl, right? Wrong.
At the end of the day, Seuss is still a sincere, compassionate man who always puts others above himself, and that earns him a high spot on our list. I mean, let's not forget that even becoming a literal zombie couldn't stop him from being pretty polite.
Can I eat your brain?
We didn't give him nearly enough credit last time around, so today the bronze medal of good goes to Dipper Pines. While Mabel is more consistently portrayed as the nice sibling, I don't think quite enough light is shown on just how good of a guy Dipper is. Being a kid, he does have his moments of impulsivity and selfishness, from brainwashing Stan during his mayoring campaign to basically everything he did during his pursuit of Wendy. Even if he didn't mean to, he still almost got Robbie killed by a video game character. That said, none of this takes away from the fact that, on the whole, Dipper is one of the most kind-hearted and selfless characters in the series. While the twins obviously love each other, Dipper is much more overtly selfless in their relationship. He constantly makes sacrifices for the sake of her safety, culminating in his willingness to give up the opportunity to do a summer internship with Ford so she would come back to the real world. Even though Mabel ultimately gave him her blessing to go for it, the fact that he was willing to give it up regardless is still really sweet. And all of that isn't even to mention how many dangerous creatures he uncovered throughout his summer at Gravity Falls. Dipper's a good guy, and while he might have a bit of a smarty shorts attitude, I'd say he's earned it. Following the podium of good, we move on to the adorable Waddles.
Oh my gosh, a pig!
This should require little to no explanation, honestly. Whereas the human characters pretty much always have some kind of sin to attribute to them, Waddles is a puppy in a pig-shaped package. He's always loyal to Mabel, Dipper, and the rest of the Mystery Shack. He might not have all the heroic deeds that our top three have, but he's more than happy to go along with whatever makes Mabel happy that day, and being a loyal companion like that is worth a lot. But Waddles isn't Mabel's only friend. Next up we have Candy and Grenda.
I'm so excited I can't breathe!
Really, these two both have their strengths and weaknesses.
Too much!
Grenda is super confident and strong and uses that strength to help her friends however she can. Candy, on the other hand, is more brains than brawn, but she's also more sensitive and openly empathetic than Grenda. On top of that, both of them are fiercely loyal friends to Mabel and often act as voices of reason to her, like when they tried to convince her to let several times go free. The worst we can say about these two is that they're, like, flawed human beings, which, like, oh no! We're talking about a triangular Satan later on, so I think we can forgive being a little aggressive or underhanded here and there. Who hasn't let a crush undermine their life in some way, after all? Speaking of crushes, we have the first real girl lucky enough to score a date with Seuss, Melody. She only really appears a couple of times throughout the series, so this is going to be a short entry, but beyond being a genuinely sweet lady, we also have to shout out the fact that she was willing to give Seuss another chance after their date ended in them almost getting murked Five Nights at Freddy's style. That showcases some serious patience, and at the end of the series, they're working at the Mystery Shack together, so hopefully that means they're as happy as ever. Now on to a love interest with way more screen time, Wendy Corduroy. Wendy has two core traits that make up the bulk of her character. She's cool, and she's Dipper's crush. Being a teenager, she does have her self-centered moments, alongside being willing to bully Thompson for basically no reason but sheer fun, which, to be fair, is something the whole group is guilty of, except maybe Mabel. Anyway, Wendy can also take advantage of others' kindness. She slacks off at her job whenever she can, leaving most of the work to Seuss, and when Mabel briefly took over for a bit, Wendy manipulated her into letting her do whatever she wanted. She earns the Sloth medal for these misdeeds. But thankfully, that's about as bad as Wendy's ever gotten. Her misdeeds are mild, and they don't come anywhere close to outweighing her good ones.
You're the coolest person I know.
I know, dude. Tell me about it later.
From helping Dipper and the gang out in countless dangerous missions, including Weird Mageddon, she's also able to handle some topics with sensitivity, like when she managed to let Dipper down easy when he finally confessed to her. She's also willing to use her strength to stick up for her friends, and like Seuss, is willing to look out for the younger kids of the friend group, like when she tagged along with Mabel and her friends on their unicorn hunting quest. This might be controversial, or it might not be. Actually, it probably isn't. Mabel Pines is a character who is as divisive as she is lovable, and she's pretty darn lovable. In some ways, as weird of a comparison as this is going to seem, Mabel is the Ned Flanders of Gravity Falls. Think about it, she's sweet to the point where her whole character is basically self-defined by it. In the episode The Last Mabelcorn, the very notion that she isn't completely pure of heart gives her a full-on existential crisis. And in several episodes, she uses her leisure time to do kind things for others. While she can take a little too much pride in being good, there's no denying that she takes sincere pleasure in doing kind things for people, from matchmaking to helping them overcome their fears. But then there's the elephant in the room, and that's the fact that Mabel is selfish.
Well, it's a horrible opportunity for me!
At least a little bit selfish. Let me just clarify that I do not think Mabel deserves to be demonized quite so much by the fandom. While she's certainly self-serving, she does usually come around and learn her lesson at the end of the day, like encouraging Dipper to go for Ford's internship if he really wants to. But that doesn't change the fact that while Mabel isn't a bad person or even sibling, she doesn't do nearly as much for Dipper as she does for her.
But today I learned that morality is relative.
She tends to prioritize whatever random dude she has a crush on that week, which makes her a relatively easy choice for the Lust Sinner medal. The result is Dipper often having to sacrifice his own happiness just for Mabel to have a chance at hers. There are moments like in Sock Opera where she makes an effort to repay his kindness, showing that she genuinely is grateful to him. But there are other moments like in Weird Mageddon where her desire to stay in an endless summer brings about the freaking apocalypse, though in her defense there's no way she could have known that would happen, and we all know Mabel's pretty easy to manipulate. Speaking of easy to manipulate, Thompson. Poor Thompson. This guy is a punching bag for his friends, all for the sake of being friends with them.
I'm just happy to be included.
I mean, heck, in the Love God episode, even Dipper messes with him. Dipper!
The perfect way to sneak cheap snacks into the concert. And it was all Dipper's idea.
Literally all Thompson wants is to be included, to the point where when the group falls apart, he makes it his mission to help them get along by any means necessary. This guy deserves better, plain and simple. How many times does Thompson deserve better? Several times! Mabel, Candy, and Grenda's favorite boy band turned out to be a product of Hollywood's corporate greed, handmade to be sold to screaming kids and their exhausted parents. Of course, that's par for the course for Hollywood, but for several times, it's literal. Like, these guys are treated as animals by their boss, only given substantial nourishment if they perform well, and threatened with being replaced by clones if they step out of line. Thankfully, when the girls free them, the guys remain pretty nice. Later on in Weird Mageddon, they act as a power source for the Mystery Shack robot the town uses to fight Bill. Making up yet another member of the characters I don't really have much to say about group is Lazy Susan. Nicknamed as such due to her lazy eye, Susan runs Greasy's Diner and seems to be pretty friendly with all her customers. Aside from that, the most notable thing about her was her date with Grunkle Stan, which, I mean, I guess I can't take points off for that, right?
Your eye is weird. Let's talk about that.
Look, not all of these characters can be interesting to talk about. Some might say that the next spot on the list goes to Mermando. This is because it is true.
There are some who call me Mermando. This is because Mermando is my name.
Mermando doesn't really play a huge role in the series. In fact, he's straight up only on screen in one episode, later appearing as a cameo in the Society of the Blind Eye episode when he's forced into an arranged marriage to a manatee. So we never saw much of him, but it says a lot about his character that he was selfless enough to marry her to keep his kingdom safe, and even write to Mabel about it so she could move on easily. Even if he couldn't be a boyfriend, he could be a pretty good friend, which is valuable in and of itself. We're moving into the more flawed characters of the good tier now. Up next is Sus's Abuelita, voiced by Matt Chapman, doing a pretty solid impression of Consuela from Family Guy.
I vacuumed the walls now.
Abuelita is the only blood relative Sus seems to be in regular contact with. I mean, they do live together after all. She's obviously a loving grandmother to Sus, trying her best to protect him from the truth of his dad abandoning him in his childhood. She even made him dinosaur-shaped cookies to try and cheer him up. That almost makes up for her stalking him during his dates with Melody. Like, girl, you just watched your grandson get nearly murdered multiple times. That's gotta be some points off, right? But since she's pretty good overall, I see no reason to get Deputy Durland and Sheriff Blubbs. This mad with power police couple makes up two of the most iconic side characters in the show, which is saying a lot. They have quite possibly the most sweet and supportive dynamic out of any two characters in the show, and while they're not exactly the most reliable cops around, they're always ready to uphold justice, and to lift each other up while they're at it.
You are a diamond in the rough.
The worst we could say about them, save for their occasional incompetence, is the fact that they do tend to make fun of the townsfolk pretty often, from clearly distressed citizens like old man McGucket to Dipper, who is a literal child. Next is the 8th and a half President of the United States, Sir Quentin Tremblay III.
8 1/2?
Tremblay isn't this low in the category because of any particular moral failings, rather, he's here because he just really did not find the right line of work for himself. Being known as the silliest president in US history, he didn't really do anything, I'll say, practical with his time in office.
He waged war on pancakes.
Nonetheless, he isn't a bad guy by any means. He even invoked his presidential privileges to send Blubs and Durland on vacation, despite them trying to put him away for the bulk of the episode. He might not be a good president, but that doesn't keep him from being a pretty decent guy overall. Now it's time to move on to one of the series' best redemption arcs, Fiddleford McGucket. If we only had season 1 to go off of, Old Man McGucket would be way lower. In this season alone, he's guilty of multiple felonies, from making a robot monster to get his son's attention to having a criminal record consisting of making other giant robots to cope with other traumas. McGucket is truly a sight to behold. Friendly though he may be, he's still not quite right in the head.
Attention all units. We got ourselves a crazy old man.
But later on, it's revealed that he wasn't always like this. In the past, Fiddleford founded the Society of the Blind Eye, a society which endeavored to erase the memories of various Gravity Falls citizens, and the use of which broke his mind severely. This was a tough pill to swallow for McGucket, made no easier by the fact that he worked alongside Ford to help create his interdimensional machine and was traumatized by the sight of Bill's true nature. This led him to leave Ford with a warning that his invention was too dangerous, and the trauma led him to create the memory erasing gun in the first place. He ultimately redeems himself by righting his wrongs though. He takes a mind bullet for Dipper, works to discover the truth of what's going on in Gravity Falls, and plays a major role in helping to convert the Mystery Shack into a mech that can fight Bill. And while there's definitely a case for placing him lower, we can't think of anyone better to close out good category than Stanley Pines, aka Grunkle Stan. Arguably the funniest and most intriguing character in the show, Grunkle Stan is quite the tumultuous character when it comes to morals. On one hand, the guy is a con artist through and through. He endangers his kids and makes them accomplices to various crimes, like counterfeiting money, and has a list of crimes large enough to take up the whole screen of a news broadcast.
Extensive criminal record.
Stan, what did you do?
What didn't I do?
Stan is a penny pincher through and through as well.
I'm giving none of this to charity.
And while he does care about his family quite dearly, even willing to fight a pterodactyl to save Mabel's pet, that would only be enough to save him from falling fully into bad territory. Thankfully though, Stan's whole story is a lot more sympathetic. After he accidentally ruins Ford's science fair experiment, Stan is kicked out of his family until he can make them a fortune, leading him to desperately make money by whatever means he could, legal or otherwise. Later, when he witnessed Ford being sucked into his own machine, Stan worked day and night to make enough money to pay his home's mortgage and eventually rescue his brother, and thus the Mystery Shack was born. Stan certainly deserves the Greed Cinder Medal, but for a pretty respectable reason. The guy devoted his life to hard work and con artistry, all for the sake of saving his brother, who'd actively ghosted him for the better part of a decade. If that weren't enough, in this series finale, he was willing to sacrifice his mind to Bill in a gambit to finally destroy him for good. Even though he ultimately bounced back and regained his memories, Stan was literally willing to give up his very essence to protect the rest of Gravity Falls, and if that's not a deed worthy of being called a hero, I don't know what is. But with that, it's time to move into neutral territory. From slightly shady characters to borderline criminals, this is the gray area. I'll admit, we might be breaking a few hearts or keyboards with this one, but Ford, aka Stanford Pines, is up next. Although he's missing in action for 3/4 of the series, Ford still manages to make a huge impact when he finally shows up. If his six-fingered hand doesn't make it obvious enough, Ford is the one who wrote the infamous journals during his research in Gravity Falls.
A journal. Just going to ignore that.
Ford discovered a ludicrous amount of ludicrous stuff here, making him one of the series' most intelligent characters, not to mention helping Dipper and Mabel immensely throughout the show, albeit mostly indirectly. Unfortunately, while Ford is a decent man at the end of the day, he loses points for his willingness to endanger the universe to continue his research. This is mostly the fault of Bill, who tricked him into granting access to his mind, but it doesn't excuse the fact that he also tried to use Stan, who he hadn't spoken to in years at the time, to take his research far away. Given how much being ghosted hurt Stan and how ungrateful Ford was when he rescued him, we have to place Ford a little lower than his twin. Nonetheless, I'd say he mostly redeemed himself in the end, even making good on the pair's childhood promise to go on adventures together. Next, we have an umbrella entry for Wendy's friends, Lee, Nate, and Tambry. Really, these three are pretty much just normal teenagers with normal teenage flaws. They're reckless, impulsive, and sometimes downright mean, mostly shown through their treatment of poor Thompson. Still, at the end of the day, they don't have any outright terrible qualities, even if they also don't really have any great ones. Our next character goes by many names, known as the Raz Dazzler, Bodacious T, or for the sake of our rankings, Toby Determined. He's one of those chaotic side characters who's really hard to pin down in terms of morality. In some episodes, he's a pretty decent guy who minds his own business, from performing at Seuss's birthday party to seemingly having a successful news career alongside Sandra Jimenez at the end of the series. At other times, however, you see him doing some pretty sketchy stuff, like being part of the Society of the Blind Eye, for one thing. There was also that time he tricked Dipper into giving up the Mystery Shack's address, handing it over to Gideon in exchange for Sandra Jimenez's phone number. The guy can be a little creepy, but he's friendly enough enough and has a somewhat intact moral compass. Let's give a quick mention to Multi-Bear,
What is a multi-bear?
the arch nemesis of the Manotaurs. Why is he their arch nemesis, you may ask? Well, that's simple. He likes girly pop music. No, really, that's it. I'm not joking. The guy seems pretty chill aside from that. Heck, he even helps out in the fight against Bill during the series finale, which shows that he's got a good heart, or a set of heads on his set of shoulders. Anyway, next is another minor character, Mr. Poolcheck. I have nothing against being passionate about what you care about, but this guy might be taking that notion a little too far. Poolcheck takes a lot of pride in his swimming pool and expects his workers to do the same. His underage workers, he has no problem yelling at kids like a drill sergeant for the sake of keeping the place running smoothly. In his defense, he really is just doing his job.
He seems emotionally unstable.
But he's doing it a little more aggressively than he needs to. But if you're looking for an aggressive character, Rumble McSkirmish fits the bill even better. In one of the best episodes of the series, Dipper summons Rumble as a bodyguard of sorts to protect him from Robbie, who wanted to fight him. While being a presumably grown adult trying to fight a high schooler is morally questionable at best, Rumble does come from a different world than Dipper, and on top of that, he was tricked into believing that Robbie killed Dipper's father.
He killed your father.
Sure.
While Rumble is vengeful and violent, always ready to find an opponent to battle with, he ultimately helps Dipper and the gang defeat Bill in the end, and some would say this is the exact moment when Rumble McSkirmish became Humble McSkirmish still. Up next is local news reporter Sandra Jimenez. Aside from being the object of Bodacious T's affection, there isn't too much to say about Sandra. While she seems like an okay, law-abiding citizen on the whole, she's also quite insensitive. When she reports on the death of Mayor Befuddlethumpter, that's his name, right?
Huckabone Befuddlethumpter.
She literally cries tears of joy on air because they finally have real news to report.
I'm just so happy.
Ma'am, a guy just died. Have some respect. Next, we have the type of guy who would eat a bowl of nails for breakfast without any milk. It's Manly Dan Corduroy. On the surface, Manly Dan seems like a spitting image of toxic masculinity.
We punch what we don't understand!
He's a short-tempered guy, and on one occasion he was willing to ram his truck into a car with 2 kids inside just because Mabel wrote several times is overrated on the window. Nonetheless, there's much more to him. Sure, he makes his kids do yearly survival training instead of Christmas, which is pretty messed up, but everything he does seems to be for the sake of keeping them self-sufficient and safe. He can also be generous, using his strength to help protect weaker citizens like Tyler, and even winning pancakes for the whole diner in Dipper versus Manliness. For our next act, we have one of Mabel's many love interests, Gabe Benson. You know, I'm just gonna let this image speak for itself. If nothing else though, he does use his passion for puppets for good sometimes, seemingly volunteering at local libraries to put on shows for the kids. That's cool. Gabe may be snooty about puppets, but at least he isn't snooty about basically everything, like Pacifica Northwest. Pacifica's character can be best summed up in 2 simple words: the worst. She's snarky, mean, rich. Well, okay, I guess rich isn't bad on its own. Still, she uses her high status as a means of belittling others, making her an easy choice for the Pride Sinner medal. There really isn't much overtly good to say about Pacifica, to be honest, but we're gonna have to give her some leeway out of sheer sympathy.
If I die, I'm suing all of you.
While she is admittedly the worst, you have to remember that Pacifica is a child, and she's a child whose parents have literally trained her like a dog to be thoughtlessly obedient to them whenever her father rings a bell. She has done a few good deeds, albeit reluctantly, even helping the town stop Bill in the series finale. It's also implied that she has at least some level of respect for the twins now, considering that she even wrapped their 13th birthday party presents.
When are you gonna open your presents already? I broke a nail wrapping them.
If she's able to break away from her toxic family, Pacifica has the potential to be a decent person. As a result, we won't put her any lower. From a potential future to an actual future, next up is Time Baby. Despite being a baby, Time Baby isn't exactly innocent. In fact, he's basically the tyrannical overlord of the universe in the far distant future. While he is ruthless in his methods, he still works to maintain stability in the space-time continuum, even losing his life against Bill during the final battle. From one sort of kind of deity to another, next we have the Love God. This beloved musician lives up to his name, with the credentials and resources to control the love lives of people around him. Despite the clear importance of his job, not to mention the risks it entails, Love God doesn't really take it too seriously. He gets distracted enough to let a 12-year-old steal one of his love potions, after all, and ultimately relent at the end of the episode, basically giving Mabel permission to literally play God. He certainly isn't a bad guy, but he really isn't the most responsible character around, which is made a bit more serious since he's, you know, a deity. And although it may be a surprise, the last spot in the gray area goes to Archibald Corduroy, also known as the Northwest Manor Ghost. This guy's a long-deceased ancestor of Wendy, but more relevantly, he was a craftsman commissioned to build build the Northwest Mansion. The payment for this job would have been inclusion for the entire town at a spectacular annual party, a reward that, although promised, would never be delivered. While his grudge against the Northwest family is completely valid, he still turns a lot of people into straight up trees in his quest for revenge, including children like poor Dipper and Mabel. Still, he ultimately relented once Pacifica finally opened the gates to the public. He may have been sticking up for social justice in the worst way possible, but he still did it. It's not completely evil, right?
I feel lumber justice.
In any case, this final category goes out to the characters you should never, ever trust. These are the bad to evil characters. Kicking off this category is the lesser of however many evils, Robbie. While Wendy's other friends have a sense of common decency, for the most part, Robbie's a jerk through and through. First and foremost, he's insecure enough to consider Dipper, a boy who's like 4 years younger than him, a legitimate romantic rival. Even before his romance with Wendy, he was mean, like when he stole a piece of Mabel's cotton candy in The Time Traveler's Pig. But it gets worse once he gets with Wendy, from challenging a middle school kid to a full-on fight, to eventually using a mysterious song to brainwash Wendy into giving him another chance after getting dumped. Now, in Robbie's very limited defense, he apparently didn't know about the CD's brainwashing capabilities, but he also claimed to write the song when in actuality he stole it from another band. Something tells me that even if he knew it had brainwashing powers, it wouldn't stop him. Still, while Robbie's a jerk, he isn't completely irredeemable. It seems he's gotten over Wendy by the finale and is able to hang around the other teens again. Hopefully he's learned his lesson and can become a little more like his weirdly chipper parents.
He always says we're too cheerful for funeral directors.
Next we have the very first bad guys in the series, the gnomes. At first glance, these little guys might seem downright harmless. What mystical forest creature is more innocent than the humble gnome, after all? Well, perhaps none, but a lot of them are less creepy.
This is normal. This is normal for gnomes.
Look, I'm willing to assume these guys didn't know Mabel was a 12-year-old, despite all of them clearly being bearded gnome men, but even if we go under the best case scenario assumption that the gnomes aren't child predators, they're still total creeps for attempting to kidnap Mabel and force her to be their bride.
You have no idea what we're capable of.
We can give them some credit for helping stop Gideon and later on Bill, but they never do this without some incentive for themselves, like a new queen.
Whoa, mature woman, huh? Hey, Schmebulok, get my cologne!
Next is another colorful creature of the forest, the majestic unicorn, Celesta Bellabethabel. Honestly, I feel like just having a name so needlessly complex is enough for me to call her evil, but on top of that, this girl constantly judges whatever human comes her way to keep them from obtaining her magical unicorn hair. It'd be understandable if she were genuinely concerned with protecting her hair, albeit still kind of a jerk move, but considering that Cella Bellabetha, whatever her name is, ends up admitting that she does it just to mess with the humans, we aren't gonna give her any benefit of the doubt. Next up, we have the Lilliputians. Really, these guys are similar to the gnomes in that they're little sentient creatures who try to kill a child on at least one occasion. The difference, however, is that the Lilliputians aren't just trying to kidnap their self-proclaimed queen. Each group of them is trying to prove that they're the best at managing their hole on the putt-putt course, and they're even willing to attempt to murder Pacifica when they think it'll win Mabel's favor. When Mabel rightly turns on them, they decided to gang up on the trio and try to kill all of them, which, as bad as it is, at least shows that they're willing to put their differences aside eventually, right? Tolerance is worth something, at least, which is why the Manotaurs land pretty low on our list. Yeah, obligatory, they helped in the final battle against Bill and all that good stuff. But we're reaching the point on the list where that really isn't worth too much. Like, what else are they gonna do? Their options are literally either fight Bill or perish. So aside from their role in the grand finale, the Manotaurs are the very embodiment of toxic masculinity. They're concerned with nothing but brute strength and general pain and suffering, and they absolutely hate everything that isn't traditionally considered manly.
Kill the multi-bear or never be a man.
This leads to them being incredibly hostile to most outsiders, particularly towards Multibear, who they consider their arch enemy and try to murder just because he has a girly taste in music. The only good trait we can attribute to the Manotaurs is that they are willing to help Dipper become more manly, but only after he frames it as a challenge, so whatever. Our next treat for you is none other than the Summerween Trickster. Gotta love how creative this series got just to justify a Halloween special despite taking place over a single summer.
Something about this feels unnatural.
The Summerween Trickster is a monster made out of loser candy, circuits, peanuts, off-brand chocolate bars, etc. Basically all the stuff you'd see at the bargain bin after the holidays at Dollar General and still pass over. He resents kids for not eating his candy. Wow, that is a horrifying sentence, isn't it? And threatens to kill them if they don't offer him enough candy before the last jack-o'-melon goes out. While eating children is a pretty terrible thing, obviously, the trickster does ultimately stop his reign of terror when Seuss enjoys his candy, showing that at the end of the day, all he wanted was some appreciation. It's time to talk about the man who loves to talk about time. Lyndon Blandon is a unique case. On one hand, hand, this guy's frustration with the Pines twins is completely understandable. By stealing his time machine, they caused multiple time anomalies and cost Blendon his job. This led him to plan out a revenge scheme on these two literal children throughout his entire stay in prison, and his plan was ultimately to use a time wish to prevent them from ever being born. Understandable grudge or not, that kind of thirst for vengeance is enough for us to easily give him the Wrath Sinner Medal. On top of that, he ridicules the kids and Seuss for wasting their time wish, showing that using a wish to help someone else is a ridiculous concept to him, and that he hadn't learned very much from his defeat at the twins' hands, even after they used a wish to restore his job to him. We're inching ever closer to pure evil territory, and next up is Bud Gleeful, the father of Lil Gideon. It goes without saying that Bud isn't exactly Father of the Year material. While he does seem to sincerely love his son, he's more than happy to use Gideon in his various money-making schemes, including, but not limited to, his celebrity status. We also have to take his clearly distressed wife into account. Like, what's going on there, Bud?
Just keep backing it. Just keep backing it.
Do we have more reasons to call the cops on you than we thought? Bud doesn't really have any redeeming qualities either. He just doesn't do quite as much depraved stuff as the remainder of the list. He's also part of the Society of the Blind Eye, which means the absolute best he'd get is a spot in the gray area. Given everything else about him though, there's no way we could be that merciful to him. Former town darling turned delinquent Gideon Gleeful is up next. As the main villain of Season 1 and secondary villain of Season 2, Gideon is a mastermind who uses the town's adoration of him to get whatever he wants, whether it's money, fame, or love. Mabel's love, specifically. Yeah, when Gideon's rejected by Mabel, he proves himself to be a total creep by trying to attack Dipper for breaking the news that she wasn't into him. Basically, if you've ever been on that r/nice guys subreddit, you know everything about Gideon's romantic side. He'll be peaches and cream until you cross him, at which point he'll become downright psychotic. We wanted to be a little more lenient on Gideon, given the fact that he's just a kid.
Don't turn this into a big deal.
Oh, I won't. I will.
But considering his regular attempts to kidnap Mabel, ruin the lives of the entire Pine family, and apparent stalking of the entire town, I think this is a fair place for him.
What's the hair?
Gideon's worst deed, by far, is definitely working alongside Bill, despite knowing how dangerous and evil he is. Until Dipper convinces him to switch sides for Mabel's sake, Gideon works as one of Bill's enforcers, which docks him a lot of points. Nonetheless, he does ultimately fight on the side of good, and by the end of the series, he at least starts reforming as a person.
I'm gonna try to be a little Gideon, regular old kid.
Okay, sure, he's 6 buff prisoners on kids who make fun of him, but at least he's trying to improve now, right? Next we have one of the series' most memorable one-off villains, Giffany. When Seuss needs to find a date for his cousin's wedding, he ends up buying a mysterious dating simulator that promises to help him learn how to talk to real women. It turns out that this game is a real woman, however, and pretty much manipulates Seuss into talking to her and only her. When Seuss actually scores a date and cuts ties with Giffany, she goes berserk and attempts to kill Seuss's new lover, not to mention the 2 children who double as his best friends, making this scorned lover the perfect choice for the Envy Sinner Medal.
The way out, Seuss, is in my arms.
I guess, in her defense, it can't be entirely easy to exist solely as an AI girlfriend, only given attention for as long as its user doesn't find a real girl to hang out with. But if anything about Giffany were tragic or sincere, it wasn't made overly obvious, so we're keeping her pretty low on the list. We've already talked about the well-meaning founder of the Society of the Blind Eye, but Blind Ivan is the kind of guy who really highlights just why it's such a dangerous group. He abuses the group's capability of erasing the memories of the townspeople to maintain a position of power and secrecy, boasting about how even if you'd met him before, you'd never recognize him. He has no problem with endangering children, nor with the fact that the brain erasing technology slowly destroys the minds of whoever uses it. All this would seem to point to Ivan being a pure evil figure, but to his very limited credit, he does express that the society is partially there to keep Gravity Falls' citizens from worrying about all the weirdness around them. In that sense, I guess he's doing something adjacent to good. Still not exactly enough to call the guy a hero at all. The Bronze Medal of Evil goes to a true personification of corporate greed, Mr. Bratzman. But first, this video is brought to you by Wicked Binge channel memberships. You can gain access to our videos early before anyone else, plus gain access to members-only emojis and loyalty badges by supporting the channel through a membership. He's the manager of several times and is responsible for cloning them indefinitely so we can make as much money as possible off their performances. He keeps these guys caged up like hamsters, seemingly only feeding well the ones who put on a good show. On top of the unspeakably messed up stuff he's doing by enslaving these boys like that, Bratzman is also reaping literally all the rewards for the hard work of his employees, not even allowing them to live lives outside of his cage in whatever concert venue they're playing that day. Bratzman is almost the epitome of what it means to be a truly evil human being. But the silver medal of evil goes to the only human character we'd consider even worse, Nathaniel Northwest. This is probably a controversial placement. Nathaniel, unlike most of the others in this category, doesn't seem to be a full-on criminal, nor is he a literal monster. However, he more than makes up for this by being the sheer essence of a revolting human being. First things first, Nathaniel is a horrible father. He insists that Pacifica win every event she competes in and doesn't even bother to stick around and watch her.
Pacifica, darling, we have a party to go to. We'll just read about your victory in the paper.
If that's not bad enough, the Northwest Mansion mystery episode sees his at-home parenting style. When he rings a bell, Pacifica immediately and almost robotically obeys his commands. It's never revealed exactly what he did to Pacifica to the point where she reacts like this to a ringing bell, but I highly doubt it was something nice. We could go on all day about every horrible thing about this guy.
We'll eat the butler.
He's a neglectful, abusive, and elitist douche who refuses to even acknowledge the existence of poor people. But even with all that considered, he has one deed that makes him even worse, offering his services to Bill Cipher at the start of Weirdmageddon as one of his horsemen. This was a shock to the whole town, including his own family, and for good reason. When he offered himself up to Bill as a servant, he showed that he was more than willing to betray his family, friends, and the whole world just for the sake of being on the winning team. Nathaniel Northwest is an irredeemable monster of a person without a single shred of goodwill in his body, and the most frustrating thing about him is that we still can't place him at number 1. Let's just cut to the chase, alright? We all know by now that the gold medal of evil goes to Ducktective's twin brother, who callously shot his brother in the season finale.
That's the big twist we were waiting for.
Okay, jokes aside though, Bill Cipher was a total shoo-in, and we all knew it. The town has some seriously unsavory characters, but we'd be doing Bill here a total disservice if we said he was anything less than pure, unapologetic evil. Bill is cold, calculating, and sadistic. He uses his nearly limitless power to manipulate and torture lesser beings for the sheer fun of it. Paired with his ruthless, cold nature, his natural charm and charisma make him easily the most dangerous character in the series, to the point where I highly doubt we even have to explain why he's number 1. Like, the guy's entire plan is to destroy the current world and create a new one that suits his psychotic whims. It doesn't get more textbook evil than that. In a world where unapologetically evil villains are becoming harder to come by, Bill has always been a breath of fresh air. Now, for a completely unrelated and not at all distressed reason, let me give you a several-minute review on The Book of Bill and why it's the greatest thing you'll ever read, even if it's not a triangle.